Good morning to the participants of the webinar this morning. I hope you are at the right place. This morning, we are going to be discussing all things localization. What does that mean? What is the implication for that for us? And what is it that we need to do in this space? My name is Nontombi Marule. I'm the Director of Innovation and Technology Policy and Strategy at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And I'm going to be a facilitator for this session this morning, which I'm quite excited that we are hosting it because it's one of our stances as a department to ensure that our stakeholders know where we are and how we unpack such things and what is the understanding of these. Without any further ado, I'm going to be introducing the panel and also unpacking the program for all our participants. So what is going to happen is that I'm going to introduce the panel to us, and so that you understand who are the experts in the room. And I will encourage those that have questions to make sure that they jot them down on the chat where there's an opportunity to pose. You can even pose them before we even start talking, so that as we continue with the process, we understand where you are at and what is it that you want to understand as a participant. And then we're going to go into the panel discussion where we are going to be talking about what does localization mean, what is the benefit, what is the implication for SMEs, for industries, for public in general. And then we're going to have two presentations, one from a director within the fleet procurement within the dtic, and one from a local content grading scheme. And then hopefully questions and answers to our panelists, and then we're going to close. Our session is not going to be too long. We are scheduled to be in here for an hour and a half. And I think what I would like to do is to give an opportunity to each of our speakers to just say good morning. Our first one is Mr. Eustace Mashimbe, who is the CEO of Proudly South African. Do you want to greet Eustace?
Yes, good morning to all the delegates, to my fellow panelists as well. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, facilitator.
Thank you. And the next one is Miss Catherine Matidza, who's the Director Fleet Procurement at the DTIC. Catherine?
Good morning, colleagues, stakeholders on call. Thank you, Program Director. My name is Catherine Matidza, the Director Fleet Procurement at the DTIC, responsible for overseeing implementation of the local content policy in the public procurement system. Thanks for the opportunity to be part of this important event.
Thank you so much. Mr. Dinesh Naidu, he's the Manager of Local Content Verification at the South African Bureau of Standards. Dinesh?
Good morning panel members, good morning delegates. It's indeed a pleasure to be part of this panel for this discussion. As the South African Bureau of Standards, we're the agency for local content verification, and I lead a team, a localization department, a team of technical and financial auditors that play a role in this field itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinesh, and welcome. Dr. Iraj Abedian, he's the Pan-Africanist investment researcher at the University of Cape Town. Prof, Doc?
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion webinar today, and I look forward to our discussions and to learn how we can take this important policy requirements forward. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I think Prof, let me start with you, just moving along. For you to just give us a synopsis of what you understand about localization, what it means, how does it benefit South Africans? I mean, being a researcher, what its relevance from where we are sitting.
Thank you very much. Localization means different things to different people depending where they sit within the economy. For example, if you're an existing manufacturer, such as Toyota, South Africa, BMW, Trelledoors, and so on and so forth, you have to ask what else can, in terms of components along the value chain, we can produce here competitively and in line with global standards. So that's at a national level about localization of content and localization of higher percentage of the ultimate value within our national borders, so to speak. What does that do? That creates jobs, that creates impetus for further industrialization, which is very important, creates income, GDP growth, tax revenues, and very importantly, it underpins brand South Africa. Now, there's another part of manufacturing has extended and deepened. I don't want to get into a lot of technical stuff, but broadly, there are two types of localization. One is deepening of localization, and one is widening of localization. Deepening means you're already in the business, you make it more and more and more sophisticated in terms of whatever is being manufactured locally. Widening or extending means there were a whole lot of things being produced yesterday, and from today we can produce one more things. And each widening that we do, it automatically creates opportunity in each of those sectors and subsectors and industries for further deepening. So localization from an economic point of view means continuously look for both widening and deepening of local manufacturing activities. I hope that helps.
That does help a lot, and I will just bring in Eustace Mashimbe from Proudly South African to then also give us his synopsis. I'm just catching it from a point where you were starting to talk about what is local content and what brand it gives to South African products. Mr. Mashimbe?
No, thank you very much. And I'm going to, throughout my quick intro, borrow from Dr. Abedian. We work very well together, and I think he nailed it. Yeah. We are a buy local campaign, like you said, and in the context of what we do is we advocate for the buying of locally made products and services. So in our world, localization means that if you're going to make a purchasing decision and you are faced with an option of either buying an imported product versus one that is locally made, that you choose one that is locally made, because that way you are helping sustain that industrial capacity that has been put in place by the one that makes the locally made product, and at the same time you help them retain the jobs that they have created, and because we focus on aggregating demand both from the public sector and from the private sector and amongst consumers for whoever is taking their products to the market. We hope that by so doing, as a result of that increased demand for locally made products and services, those companies will then be in a position to produce more products, and as a result will then have a need to create new job opportunities, because they will then need to bring in additional workforce. So that is what for us localization means, about how do you retain the jobs, how do you create much needed new job opportunities, and how do you regain any share of the market that might have been lost to imports. Obviously, competitiveness is an important conversation when talking about localization. We're not saying people should just blindly buy that which is locally made, but there are industries where we're highly competitive. And so what are we doing to help those? There are industries that there are possibilities for new industries. And in fact, Dr. Bedian can talk more about that. There are possibilities for new industries because there are opportunities, endless opportunities. The conversation I had as a country program director, I had with the ITech commissioner was around how do you, as a country, use the opportunity in the energy space, as an example, to start building up, the kind of capacity required, and for things like solar PV panels, a lot of it that is deployed in households and in industrial sites where people are going for renewables and installing solar. A lot of it comes from outside of the country. Now, to make it worse, there's even a tax incentive. So we are saying you must benefit from the tax base of the country, but the products are leaving. The money is leaving the country, but the products are coming from outside of South Africa. So you need to find a balance. I think there should be conditions that says if you are going to benefit from that tax incentive, whatever, as best as possible, whatever you are utilizing should be sourced locally. But obviously, we have to build in the capacity. We have to install sufficient capacity in the country for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Without further ado, I want to bring Ms. Catherine as well. I have quite a number of questions that I want to pose to you after this, but I think I want to give all the panelists an opportunity to just brace the subject so that then we can go into question and answer. Ms. Catherine.
Thank you, Program Director. I'll borrow from my other colleagues, Dr. Abedian and Eustace. Yes, we work closely together. For us, localization, it's a broad concept and it includes in it many things. And my understanding is that in the context of South Africa, localization is a collective process by government, private sector, and labor, aimed at building local industrial capacity for both domestic and export market. The essence of localization is to encourage the replacement of imported products with locally manufactured alternatives. And from where I'm seated, government has identified public procurement as a lever for industrial development. We want to leverage the expenditure to support the government expenditure to support mainly manufacturing of products and to mitigate some of the socio-economic challenges that we are faced with. And in the public procurement space, what does it mean to us? Like Eustace has said, the decisions that we make when we buy products, goods and services, if we choose to buy imported products, we should know that we are exporting the jobs to those countries where the products are emanating from or are originating from. And if we make a decision to buy products that are manufactured here in South Africa, we are assisting in retaining the jobs that we still have and also in the creation of new jobs, because that will support our local industry. So as part of the localization strategy, since 2011, government has been implementing the local content policy, which is administered by the DTIC. And this local content policy, it was a cabinet decision. It's not a DTIC thing. It's a decision that was made by government to say, this is how we're going to procure goods and services. By so doing, saying that preference will be given to products that are manufactured in South Africa. So DTIC since then has been designating sectors and products, and to date, we have designated about 28 products. Thank you, Program Director. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Catherine. Mr. Naidu, I think you can come in and tell us from your standards. Now the regulator, the standards guy comes in, tell us what we are doing there and how are you assisting us in terms of making sure that this happens.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think that's very, very key, because that's where the SABS comes in. As the verification agency for local content verification, we come in and we have the more difficult job to do. We've got to look at the fact that organizations out there have made declarations and they've possibly even won tenders stating that this is what their local content percentages are. And we've got to have teams that are very clinical, that need to go in very objectively and to look at the evidence in front of us and to make sure that we can confirm the true local content percentage. And it's very interesting because, again, Dr. Iraj started off by saying local content means different things to different people. And as in SABS, we see this every day. The organization that has tendered sees local content from one angle. And very often, the angle is, if we can source the product locally, then it's local content. And yet, when you look at local content and its true meaning, and the colleagues have touched on some of that, the panel members have spoken about it, but local content is about the value chain. It's about the end-to-end value chain and confirmation that the input materials at the various stages of the value chain, and in the language that we use is we talk about different tiers of suppliers. So the company that wins a bid is the tier 1, and you can get to a tier 3, a tier 4. And what you tend to look at is, does the input material at those various stages, can it be confirmed that those are local? Eustace has also shared the opportunity out of all of this. And as we do these verifications and we pick up that certain products can only be, are only available from an import perspective, then what it does for South Africa and for entrepreneurs, it creates a business opportunity. And it's how we leverage this as we go forward. So all these little parts and the bits of work that we do cannot be seen in isolation. It's the ability to put this all together and to leverage on this so that we grow the local economy. We find that local content is about using local labor. It's about making sure that we have local factories. It's not just about the product on its own, but it's everything that goes into the makeup of the product itself. So yeah, we have a tough job on our hands. We need to be, like I said, very, very objective. And unfortunately, we're the bad guys in the process. But again, if the team remain objective, then we're adding value to the process itself. I hope that assists. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I like what you've just said, because it gets me into sort of packaging. I would like for us to package our information based on what you have said. So you can either agree with me or maybe correct me if I'm wrong. So if you look from what you have said, issues around localization, one is about production, right? And inputs that go into that production, just making sure that whatever it is that you use in your processing, you are, incorporating local content as much as you can. That's the first one for me. But secondly, it's not independent of the consumers as well, in terms of taking cognizance of deliberately consuming what has been produced locally. That's second. But also you need capacity to be able to do this. Infrastructure and human capital. Obviously funding, there will be other things. There's regulatory around it, and there's procurement as a tool. Now, with that being said, I would just like maybe starting with Catherine. Catherine, in terms of the first one, production input, and also the procurement, as you talked about, in a sense of using it as a tool, how does that then help if I'm talking to an SMME and I'm talking to somebody who's trying to get a new industry, or somebody who's already industrializing? What are the stances that the department is taking, and how are we assisting them to make sure that on these two aspects, they get assisted? I will even ask Eustace to come in where that is concerned. I'll start with you, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Like my colleague Dinesh has alluded, that in terms of localization, it's not only about purchasing products locally. It goes as deep as looking at the value chain. We understand in the procurement space, especially public procurement, not only manufacturers are allowed to bid for bids. And when it comes to the local content requirements, by its nature, the product should have been produced in the country from South African raw materials, because all the designated products that I've highlighted in my introduction, there are minimum thresholds attached to them to say that a particular product that will be considered to be local content, it must have this level of local content. Therefore, when one is responding to such requirements, one, you need to identify a local manufacturer where you source the products from. So it's not about only purchasing, it's about the production of that particular product. For those that are not manufacturers themselves, they need to develop relationships with the local manufacturers so that they will be in a position to meet those requirements. And from our side, we work closely with Proudly South African. Most of our bidders, in many times you find that they don't even know where they can source a compliant products. So we always refer them to institutions like Proudly South African because they have a database and they deal directly with companies and manufacturers, and they can get assistance from their side in terms of where can they source their products. Somewhere, somehow you touched on issues of incentives. We do have various support in the form of financial support for those that want to start or move into the space of manufacturing. It's a good thing that our bidders, they don't only remain as consumers of the products like sourcing and supplying. They should also move into the space of manufacturing, and we understand that it can be at different scales. They can start small and grow as time goes by, and government has got some form of support for those companies that want to move into the space of manufacturing as well. So in terms of implementation, you will see in my presentation that there are some declarations that companies or bidders are expected to complete in terms of self-declaring their level of local content. And that's self-declaration, hence we have SABS as our verification agent, because at the time of bidding, they complete those forms to indicate what their level of local content is. And after award, there's a process that is followed, and that's where SABS comes in to verify. We're not saying only manufacturers can participate, even those that are mere distributors, because we understand that you need to start somewhere. They can, but then they will need support from the manufacturers for them to source from those manufacturers. And in terms of the bidding process, there are some tenders that are specifically reserved for such companies, smaller companies, in terms of the bidding, so that we understand that they are not at the same level with the big companies. They might be small and they will grow. So hence there are those sort of reserved tenders or rainfest for such small companies. Thanks.
Okay. So in essence, you are talking about also nurturing those small and growing industries and also protecting them and also making sure that we are providing an enabling environment such that they can thrive.
Yes, and we also work closely with Department of Small Businesses and such. They have a localization framework, and we work with them on that to bring the startups on this program as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Mr. Mashimbe, if you can just also weigh in around production and regulation and procurement.
So in terms of production, and I think Catherine touched on what I wanted to speak about in terms of public sector procurement, to say, the instrument of designation was informed by the capacity that exists in the country. And so that's why we are confident to take on the public sector now, especially with this new, dynamic that has come up as a result of the court ruling that says every single state entity must develop its own procurement policy. We are now saying to state entities, if you are going to buy anything that was previously designated, consider buying it locally, because the capacity exists. That work was done to establish whether we have the ability to meet the demand that will come from the public sector, without necessarily even taking away the ability for those specific industries to supply to the private sector. And so there's no excuse. In all honesty, there's no excuse. Competitiveness can only be achieved if you get to economies of scale that gives you, a certain price point. Because, we hear a lot from the private sector saying to us, we can't just expect them to buy locally. Competitiveness is key. Price is key. So what we are saying to industry, and as part of can we're having those conversations, we are saying, can we arrive at a certain price point for certain industries. A good example is our conversations with the cement guys, where we're saying to them, you know, they keep telling us about the fact that, you know, when you look at the installed capacity in the country and the levels of usage of that installed capacity, is still far below. There's still room to grow, you know, that which is produced in the country. If you consider that about 10% of the share of the market is lost to cement that comes from Pakistan and some of those countries. We then said to them, meet us halfway. Can we arrive at a certain price point? But they're saying they can only arrive at that certain price point if they are also given a sense that, you know, orders will come through, because it's about, you know, if they increase the levels of production, you know, economics has taught us that you are then able to easily control your price, your input costs as a result of those economies of scale that will have been achieved. So that is what directs our thinking as private sector when we engage the private sector and the public sector. Because for us, it's about where are you buying it? Where is it coming from? How can we help you find a producer that makes it locally, such that you prioritize them? When you choose them, we represent a base of companies that join us because of the advocacy responsibility we have, where we say to them, we are going to roll out various access to market programs aimed at making sure that anyone who makes a purchasing decision chooses to buy from you, because you will have been vetted for local content. We are giving an assurance to anyone who makes a purchasing decision that you can trust companies that carry the Pan South African logo, because you know that they've been vetted for local content. SABS is a key partner in terms of their local content verification scheme, because then they can then give you even a sense of the threshold that has been met by the respective supplier. So there's no excuse really, in all honesty, especially when it comes to those 28 broad sectors that have been previously designated by government, because capacity exists. Thanks.
If I can be, thank you for that, Mr. Mashimbe. If I can be direct, don't unmute yourself, because I wanted to ask, there's a question that came from the floor that talks about the strength of the rand and whether global markets are ready for our products, which talks to competitiveness. So I just wanted to find out from you, so because also as we are increasing local content, we are not saying South Africans are the only buyers. We are saying we're doing this even for export market. So how do you think we fare considering the strength of the rand and how then the global market responds to what we are making?
I think you've sort of given us the response. If you aggregate the demand that exists in the country and you add to that those export markets that are already taking our products or that are already looking out for our products, you are then even helping those who are going to export, because they can then bring down their prices as best as possible because of increased demand that, you know, they will have achieved locally. And that is how our products will be able to compete, not just within the borders of South Africa, but externally as well, because as long as we are not able to assist our guys to get to that certain price point where they can compete, we're going to battle. But how else do you do it? And maybe I'm biased because I work for Pan South African, but the economists on the call and they can tell you, how else do you do it? Economies of scale are going to help you. Aggregate the demand, both from the private sector and the public sector, and get consumers also to buy into it. We have a huge consumer responsibility, consumer education responsibility as Pan South African, because there are people with consumer-facing products, and that is where consumers then play an active role in ensuring that our products can compete locally as well as internationally, because we will then be buying from them and assisting those who have already invested, and that investment will be lost as well. And that's the other side of it. Those investments will be lost because if no one is buying from you, it does not help you. You will not be able to keep your doors open. And once you've lost that capacity, it's difficult to get it back. Sure.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I think now I want to just put a spanner on the works and put Doc Abedian and Dinesh on the spot, because I want us to go a little bit onto those particular products. And because I'm from the innovation and technology desk, I want to find out how does that assist in terms of making sure, let's say, people are innovating and our procurement laws are not really open to really acquiring new technologies. How do we assist that? And maybe Dinesh, from your point, what will be your position or your stances around verification of that? How do you assist that dynamic I'll start with you, Doc.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you for connecting the two. I was going to ask Dinesh down the line as to how do we speed up the SPSA's presence in the market. Over the past 10 years, unfortunately, the organization went through a steady decline. It lost a lot of credibility within the industry, and also it pushed a lot of services of what would have been SPSA's services overseas. It went the other way. Instead of increasing local content, it went the other way. And that is a problem. We need to, in the industry, as well as broadly within the economy, we need to promote alongside buy local, alongside localization, a culture of creativity, innovation, and really a non-stop quest for upgrading quality. So we cannot talk about cars are not just cars. Clothes is not just clothes. You can't say, well, I'm in a clothing. Well, clothing has got a zillion shades and grades and market niches. Vehicles have the same. And everything that we produce, we need to first and foremost benchmark it to the top end from a quality point of view in whatever niche we are. If you're targeting the super rich, then you got to be the best quality in that niche. If you are targeting the middle, the same thing. And all of it's got one thing in common. Are there opportunities for the use of technology, innovation, and creativity in order to bring down the unit cost in order to be more competitive? South Africa on many fronts has been on the back foot in terms of our digital connectivity, speed of internet, as we all know, has been an obstacle for the for many of our service providers. Remember, the global market in many areas has become very, very flat. If your speed is good, if your quality is good, you can do whatever you need to do on the beach, as they say, and sell it to whoever is sitting in Shanghai or sitting in New York, and they wouldn't know where you are. A good example is my own field, and my colleagues here can testify. If you can produce and as we can see, the presentation is clear, the concepts, the width, the internet is reliable, and the power cut is not causing problems for you, then you can target the global market. And therefore, you got to say, how do I make my services globally competitive? Who are my competitors? How can I be at least as good as they are, and ideally a little bit better? So I think the importance of innovation cannot be literally overemphasized in whatever we are. If we want to produce the same old way, and then appeal to government for subsidy and appeal for that for support and a weaker rand and so on, that's going the wrong way. That is not business. That is charity at the expense of somebody else. And the economy is a zero-sum game. Somebody that supports you has to tax somebody else to support my business. So, and that we must also remember, that we cannot get ourselves in a sort of a zero-sum game. We cannot push for making some industries taxed more, less competitive, less attractive for further investments so that my business can grow. That is not the way to think of it. Macroeconomy means we are on the same boat. We cannot make holes in it, but we must be creative to extend its speed of the boat, its resilience of the boat, and so on. And in that regard, innovation in technological advancement is critical. One last point, if I may, in that we need to also hook up the various segments of market. What do I mean by that? Because, for example, you can have the best innovation in producing item X as a producer, and you're globally competitive in terms of quality. But if the distribution channels are not open to you, if the wholesalers and retailers at the local market, for whatever reason, historic reason, policy reasons, whatever, or blocked, then you're going to be, even with your innovation, you're not going to get far. I know a few industries in my little research and network where they are exactly in that position. Their products are globally competitive. They are innovative, but when they want to get their products onto the shelf, so to speak, they have the obstacle of global culture, the global network, and so on. So one humble suggestion that I have for my Catherine and team at DTI is to actually introduce not local content in the percentage terms, but literally bring the supermarkets and wholesalers into a one-day room and say, okay, what are some of the items that you import and they can be manufactured locally, and why? What is blocking the local manufacturers to do that? And let me give you one or two examples. South Africa shouldn't be importing tomato paste.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So I want to know why, what is it in the blockage that makes tomato paste, which is a run-of-the-mill? We have the land. Tomato is a weed. You can grow it anytime, anywhere just about, except in the cold areas of Lesotho and so on, our KZN. But the rest of it, you can grow it. Why do we have to import it? Why do we have to import so many things?
Thank you, Doc. And I think you are on the money there, because there's a question. Before I bring Mr. Naidu in, Mr. Naidu, there's a question on the floor from Tim White, who says, as you're doing your response, maybe also consider this question. He's talking about the fact that he's at Walter Sisulu University Center of Entrepreneurship, and they are supporting 500 customer commodities across agro-processing. And his question is around how can SABS assist them in this regard? So maybe as you are doing that, your response, maybe not as long as docs, please, because we need to get into the presentation, and then you can deal with that question as well. Thank you. Dinesh?
Thank you very much. So I think let me just frame this in a few ways. I think your first query was largely around innovation. Yeah. And what is, how do we support this innovation? So from a South African Bureau of Standards perspective, and having been the verification agency involved in localization for the last 10 years, what we have found is that there has been a gap, and the gap has come in the space of innovation. And the reason for it is the model for localization in the last 10 years has been very much around a winning bidder and then a verification being done on a winning bidder. And so you'll see just now that when I do make the presentation, you'll see that the SABS to close this gap, and the gap was largely there in the space of supporting local innovation and supporting the drive of these innovators to come up with new manufacturing best practices and new processes. And so the SABS has launched the local content grading scheme, which is really an upfront verification process. It's not dependent on winning a bid. And these are very much voluntary requirements that come about. So I won't take too much of time because the presentation will cover how that works. So I'll certainly cover that. But I think Doc also raised the point around SABS, its role. And it became abundantly clear that if we do not make quality products, then no matter how much we want to get into the export market, it's going to be of no benefit. The economies of scale may allow us to get there, but if the quality of our products are not aligned, we're going to have a problem. So from an SABS perspective, we've got the SABS mark, which is the approval on products. And all of this cannot be seen in, separately. All of them play an integral role in supporting localization. And so it's a factor that we need to take into account, which brings me to the question that's come about in terms of the question around the work being done to support local industries. I think you mentioned the Walter Sisulu University itself, or Technikon. And so with that in mind, SABS can certainly play a role. We have a small business desk at the South African Bureau of Standards, and we play roles in supporting these small businesses. So we certainly can open that door. It certainly can be a link from our side to link the university to our department that focuses in this area. And we can certainly look at how we, find mechanisms to take that forward and not leave them operating on their own, but rather being supported by the SABS as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. There's quite a number of questions that have popped up. Some comments, some questions that we can deal with. But I think I want to give the opportunity to Ms. Matita to do her presentation. Catherine, you're going to have 10 minutes tops. I think just fast, because I think our attendees are very hungry to get their own answers so that we give them an ear. And then I'll give to Dinesh, and then we can take it from there. But at least we still have some time. I'm just hoping that from your presentations, some of the questions will be slightly answered, because there was one that says, well, how is government assisting in terms of localization? So there's quite those. Let's see your presentations, and then I will try and sum up some of the questions if your presentations don't talk to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. I hope I'm trying to share from my side. Is my presentation flagged?
Yes, we can see your presentation. We are on the outline. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. I'll briefly touch on the policy and regulatory context, the rationale for localization, of which some we have already touched in our discussions, and then take you through the list of products that are designated, the 28 that I have mentioned, and a little bit on implementation. Okay. I'm trying to move the slides. If the list is on call, I'm trying to move the slides. They're not moving on my side, but I can speak through the presentation. In our industrial policy toolbox, the list you can share from your side on slide number 3. Thank you. In our industrial policy toolbox, we have a number of instruments in place. Under localization, we have the local content and production policy. And this is to address the issue of decline in terms of the manufacturing sector's contribution to the GDP and the decline in employment levels. And this can be attributed to the issue of importation of high value added products to the country. And as a way of addressing the decline in line with the National Development Plan, the Reimagined Industrial Strategy, and the ERP, government has designated sectors. And we're using the financial muscle by government, our expenditure, to address those. And as you all aware that in terms of procurement, this space is highly regulated, and currently we using the PPPFA, which is the Public Procurement Preferential Framework and its regulation. Hence, in 2011, when the government decided to go this route of localization or giving preference to products that are being produced in the country, we had to review our regulations. The then regulation, preferential procurement regulations, were amended to make provision for promotion of locally produced products. Even in 2017, when we were reviewing those regulations, local content remained as part of the regulations. In that space, products that were manufactured locally, it became part of the law that where DTIC has designated sectors, government, all organs of state, when they go out to purchase those products, they must include local content requirements in their purchasing. You may move to the next slide, please. So this is to address some of the issues like high rate of unemployment in the country. We believe that if we support the manufacturing as a sector of the economy, it's got the broad-based capacity to absorb people in terms of labor, and also will be sustaining the little jobs that we still have. And Doc has raised the issue that in terms of designating as the DTIC, we shouldn't only look at the percentage and also targeting public expenditure. The private sector also has to play its role, and they've come to the party. We've seen through the NEDLAC process, the private sector also had made a commitment that they are going to localize, and they agreed to a compact on localization in the last quarter of 2020. And it didn't begin there. Even in 2011, when the local procurement accord was signed, private sector made a commitment that they are also going to achieve 70% of localization. And we have seen a number of retailers localizing, retailers such as Mr. Price in their shelves. Most of the products that they are selling are manufactured in South Africa, the Foschini Group, the Edcons, Pick n Pay now, and also Truworths, Woolies, and some of their products are manufactured locally. And as the DTIC also, we have a number of master plans, and in those master plans, there are some local procurement commitments made by the private sector. Next slide, please. So the rationale really is to develop and enhance local manufacturing capacity and capabilities, support industrial innovation and technological development. And the storyline of designation is that of creating jobs. We say into the local industry, they mustn't only look at the domestic market, they must be competitive globally and look also at exporting their products to other places. And in terms of support, we do have a number of incentives, one being the Black Industrialist Program to support Blacks to move into the space of manufacturing as well. Next slide, please. And these are the products that are designated to date. As you can see on the date, the last column, there we've indicated the effective date of a particular designation. We started with only 5 items in 2011, 2012, and we've been adding to the list over the years. We started with the rail rolling stock, the power pylons, bus bodies, canned processed vegetable, textiles, clothing, leather, and footwear. You can see as we're designating across sectors. We're not targeting just one sector. We designating across sectors. We have the valves, we have the working vessels, which are boats, we have the firefighting vehicles, we have steel products and components for constructions, we have the cement, we have bulk material handling, and the middle column indicates the threshold in terms of the local content required. And these thresholds are informed by the research conducted by the sectors within the branch. So we don't just guess the level of local content. There is work that goes into that. Research is conducted, and within the DTIC, we do have a framework that we follow, and if all boxes are ticked, then we will at the end designate that particular product. There are some products that were also considered previously, but at the end, the results showed that designation won't be an appropriate tool to support that particular sector. And in that case, we didn't designate the sectors. Mainly, most of the sectors that are here, there is sufficient local capacity. And also, due to specifications by organs of state or buyers, if a particular manufacturers cannot meet the required local content requirements in the process, there is a provision for request for exemptions. So those manufacturers, if they can meet the level of local content stipulated on that particular designation, they can approach the DTIC to request an exemption. And the DTIC also will investigate if surely the local content cannot be met for various reasons, and therefore the DTIC will decide whether to grant or not to grant that particular exemption requested. Next slide. So we've seen some changes recently in terms of the regulations, the legislation, And Eustace touched on it to say that there was a Concord judgment with regard to the regulations that previously empowered the DTIC to designate products for local procurement and for organs of state to implement the local content as a mandatory requirement. Under the new regulations, powers are vested with the individual organs of state to determine their procurement policies in terms of preferential issues. Therefore, the change is that in the past, National Treasury used to issue out instruction notes, circulars to guide organs of state on how to go about the procuring products that are designated by the DTIC. And following the judgment now, the powers are vested with individual organs of state to put in their own policies, supply chain management policies, these requirements. So in other words, local content and production is no longer a compulsory requirement under the 2022 preferential procurement regulations, but that it's not to say local content or localization, it's scrapped off in public procurement system. All it says is that now the implementation is different. It can be included as a specific goals and scored accordingly. Previously, it was a mandatory requirement, a qualification criteria. If one is not meeting, they were like eliminated from early in the process of evaluation of the tender. And under the current regulations, if one is not meeting the required local content, they will lose the points allocated for local content as a specific goal. A number of organs of state, they continue implementing the local content, and as the DTIC, we have assisted them in determining their individual supply chain management policies to indicate the local content requirements. So after the Concord judgment and after publication of the new regulations, there was a lot of confusion in terms of interpretation, and some organs of state, they've interpreted the new regulations to be saying that local content is no more a requirement, and Treasury has clarified to say that that's not the case. The new regulations are not to say local content cannot be implemented. The new regulations were responding to the judgment to say organs of state, they can determine for themselves. So some of the challenges that we are faced with is that now the onus is on procuring organs of state to stipulate this requirement. And as a result, there is no uniformity. And for some, they are not even implementing, waiting for National Treasury to issue guidelines. And unfortunately, National Treasury can't issue guidelines because the judgment made it clear that the Minister of Finance is not within his powers to issue such guidelines under. So as the DTIC, we have taken it upon ourselves to develop these guidelines. It's work in progress. We have just finalized and will be going through the approval processes, and just to assist organs of state to continue implementing the local content. So this is an example of how it can be presented under the new regulations. As you can see on the screen, local content is stipulated as one of the specific goals there and allocated points. And unlike in the past, the points can differ from one transaction to the other, depending on the particular organs of state of what is it that they want to achieve with that particular transaction. On this example, we're saying if it's an 80-20, 6 maybe can be allocated, and if it's a 90-10, 3 points can be allocated for local content, but it's purely up to the organ of state. It's entirely upon them to determine what points and what goals to apply or advance in that particular transaction. Next slide, please.
I ask you to wrap up, Catherine. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So also the regulations requires that the organ of state must determine the proof that should be presented for a particular company that's claiming points. And in terms of localization, because they must source from local manufacturers, then a manufacturer's letter can serve as a proof for that purpose. Next slide. The documents that were used previously are still applicable, except for the SBD, which is a standard bidding document 6.2. But we always advise organs of state that they can customize it and continue to use it. Remove the clauses that talks to the previous legislation, the 2017-2011 PPRs, and make it compliant or align it to the 2022 regulations. Next slide, of which it's my last slide. So as the DTIC, we continue to engage with organs of state on the importance of including local content and BEE measures, the transformation measures. And as you may be aware that there's a public procurement bill that's being finalized, and local content is coming back as a compulsory or a mandatory requirement in the bill. So these regulations are just for the interim. Once the bill is finalized, then local content is going to be compulsory. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and sorry to pressurize you. It's because of where I'm just trying to manage time, but that was very good. Thank you so much. So I think from the panel, from the attendees, there are two questions that speak directly to the presentation that you have made. So one comes from anonymous attendee who says the preferential procurement regulations of 2022, what is the DTIC doing to promote the local production and content for the 28 designated products? Don't answer that now because there's another one, so I want you to use both. And then also he says again, the carrot and stick on localization, how do government incentivize companies embarking on localization? And what is the penalty? That is what I wanted to get to, or consequences for those that are not localizing. So I think for me, those are the direct ones that come from the decision that you have made. If you can answer them for us whilst Dinesh gets ready. Catherine?
Thank you, Chair. On the first question that refers to the 2022, what DTIC is doing to promote the 28 designated products. Like I've alluded to the fact that we have recently developed the guidelines, which will be published to support organs of state, those that are keen to continue implementing the local content. And we engaging also with the biggest buyers like the Transnet, the ESCOM, to continue supporting localization, local content. I may safely say on this platform that ESCOM has taken it upon themselves to continue with the designation, so they continue implementing fully. We currently requested an engagement with Transnet to look at their procurement plan and also to assist them to continue implementing the local content requirements, though it's at their own discretion now, because we have a good relationship with them and we know that their procurement like plans, they are procuring a lot of these designated products and the values there are big values. So we just want to make sure that we secure commitment from their side that they will continue implementing the local content requirements. So work is being done by the DTIC to ensure that the designations are not being redundant. They don't become just dummy designations, but they are lively. The change in legislation doesn't make the designation to be irrelevant. So we still uphold the designation and localization as the DTIC. And the second question, Chair, I didn't get that clearly.
So the second question was that I think, so the other one that I was talking to, I want to also bring in this comment where one Louis Chalclen was saying in Australia, they have a mandatory requirement for all new businesses to register as MIA companies, and then comes with the mandatory vetting for that specific sector. And I think it goes with Anonymous, where they are saying, what is then the penalty if one doesn't take on this local content? I think my question is around, is it possible to make it mandatory? And if, because I heard you kept on saying, you know, it's up to those institutions to decide whether they want. But if one doesn't, what is then the result? And maybe if Mashimbe wants to come in as well, can come in. But I think I thought that stems from your presentation per se.
Okay, I can briefly touch on it and Mashimbe can come in. In terms of public procurement, in the past, the regulations were tight. If you're not localizing, then you won't be considered for that particular transaction. So then I would say that on its own was a penalty. But under the interim regulations is that if you're not localizing, then you won't be allocated points for local content. You lose the points in terms of local content. And for other programs or like incentives, I know that there are those that preference is given to those that are localizing. And if you're not localizing, then it puts you on a disadvantageous side. You might not be considered if not localizing. But I will ask Mashimbe to come in.
Thank you, Catherine. Mashimbe, do you want to
weigh in? I think she's completely correct. And the advantage we have now is because there's no legislation that forces procurement practitioners in the public sector to buy local. You then now depend on the individual policies to have those provisions, such that when the Auditor General or the auditors come in, because auditors audit you according to your policies, that's the only way that people can be penalized for not complying. And so the biggest task, and that's why we're happy to see that the DTIC is coming up with guidelines. The biggest task in the public sector right now, and I think it needs political intervention of some sort, is to get individual entities to include these local content requirements in their policies. And then that way, we know that the industrialization objectives that government had before that court case will not have been lost as a result of the adverse finding against the state. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you to our panel attendees, Louis and Anonymous, and I'll read some of them later on. Let me give Dinesh an opportunity as well. There's quite a number also, Dinesh, for you in terms of standardization. So I think some of them, let's hear your presentation, and if I feel that you haven't covered them, then I'll bring them up. Thank you. Over to you. Please, if you can take 10 minutes tops, I would appreciate that. Thanks, Dinesh.
Not a problem at all. Thank you for that. So maybe just at the outset, one of the questions that I did see, and I think Eustace has covered part of that, but there was also a question around, what happens now with localization, with the legislation changes. And so I think just to clarify that all tenders that were awarded prior to the 16th of January of 2023 are still subject to verification. So the SABS is still actively verifying those commitments. And the main reason for it is because very often those products that those tenders were awarded for generally are running for the next year or 2 years in terms of being supplied to these state-owned entities. So the importance of that verification certainly carries weight in the process itself. I will run through the presentation itself. Just give me one moment. Okay, all right. So just at a high level, this just gives an indication of SABS and its role. You'll see that one area is that of local content verification, but we're very much involved in certification, laboratory services. And I think Doc had raised the point to say, how is SABS reclaiming their position? And then there's a lot that the organization is currently doing to make sure that in these other areas of certification, consignments, training, laboratory services, that capacity is being built, rebuilt in certain cases, especially in the lab space, so that we can deliver on those services itself. There was a question as well in the chat box around development of standards. I think it was Steve that raised a point to say, why is SABS not getting, still being active in the technical standard space? And you'll see from this, though, that SABS is very much maintaining standards. There's about 7,300 that we maintain. At any given time, on a year-on-year basis, we are working with about 280 to 300 standards. So that will cut across both technical and general standards as well. We're involved in the product and system conformity assessment business. And the last part is that around local content verification. So I touched on this a little bit earlier. SABS had seen a gap in the market and launched the local content grading scheme. This was done in October of 2021. You'll see that it was designed for any suppliers or manufacturers that wanted to get involved and claim their localization or get an independent view of what their local manufacturing percentage is. The key terminology is it's an upfront verification. And the advantage then is it can target both the public and the private sector. And the advantage of the system itself, it's a 5-year certificate with annual verification audits that are built in. So I'm just trying to change, there we go. So the key to the scheme itself, it allows any small business, any company out there that wants to claim this verification. And it doesn't mean that they need to comply with any specific level. So if you look at the slide, a company that complies with as low as 1 to 9% local content can get and can qualify for a certificate. And the advantage of the scheme is that in the 5-year cycle of the certificate, the company can then progress and eventually move to, a category F and then get closer to a category C. So the mechanisms can be put in place, initiatives can be put in place to constantly improve their local content percentages. Again, this just gives an indication of how the calculation is done, but in local content and the upfront verification through the local content grading scheme, the main crux of it is based on the selling price of the product. This is key, and this slide probably tells the whole story around how the verification process works. There's an application, there's a review of the application, there's a scoping of the project, and a quotation is generated. Once quotation is generated and the quotation is accepted, then we are then in a position to start conducting the actual verification. The verification is done on 2 levels. So we have a financial verification auditor on the team and a technical auditor. And the main reason is they work together, they work in tandem, and the whole purpose is to support each other. So the technical guy is really there to question the manufacturing process, to see whether at a glance that product can really be made at the facility that was shown to the SABs. We've seen some horror stories. We go into plants where there's 2 machines, but they're making, they claim to make a product that requires 10 machines as an example. So our technical guys are able to verify that, share it with the financial guys so that the final declaration on local content is made more accurately. This touched on, and I think we've covered it already, but what it really says is that local content is not just about sourcing locally. It talks about these different pillars, and I think we've covered this in quite a lot of depth already. In terms of the overall audit process itself, there's a preliminary stage, a pre-verification, there's the field work and the reporting. The main part of local content is about taking the bill of materials, which comes from if it's through the dtic angle, then it's from the winning bidder. If it's through our local content grading scheme, then it's from the applicant. And the applicant will then say to us, here's my bill of materials. This is what I am declaring goes into the manufacture of my product. What we then do and what my team then does is they verify that through the technical and financial auditor intervention. And these generally involve site visits to the applicant itself and then to the various tier suppliers. The field work, again, is the actual work that takes place. I won't take too much time on that. And then the last part of the process is where a report is generated, which then supports the local content percentage that is communicated to the supplier. Just in terms of costs, and it's difficult to say it costs, there isn't a fixed cost, but in the total cost itself, what you will see is that about 20% goes to the preliminary stage, 60% is allocated to the field work, and the remaining 20% to the final reporting stage. Again, the verification and this particular certificate is valid for 5 years. And like I've already touched on, in the 5-year cycle, a company can improve their level of verification, but the opposite is also true. So if during the surveillance audits that's built in annually, a supplier is not still procuring vented when the certificate was issued, then that could also mean that that supplier's local content percentage can become lower, and their percentage and their grade becomes lower as well. So important to just touch on some of the scheme benefits itself. It provides data to support localization initiatives. That's the first thing. It can be used to implement preferential procurement policy. It's an upfront verification, and I've stressed on that already. Can be used as a marketing tool for local manufactured products. Assist local manufacturers with Made in Africa. So it ties in closely with the work that we're doing that is taking place on the Proudly South Africa side, and it links the two. But it also then gives that final credibility to any localization claims that are made by a manufacturer. So to avoid duplication, it starts to overlap with some of the work that the DTIC will be doing in getting state-owned entities to comply and to include this in their procurement requirements. That these companies that volunteer to then declare their local content percentages, these certificates can be incorporated, and so you don't duplicate costs. And that's the key to this. Some high-level cost savings, and I'm on the second last slide right now. The trick here is when you do these verifications, how do you get to the primary material suppliers? And if we do them first, it means that we don't have to then verify those companies again. If a manufacturer claims to then buy from that primary mill, we can utilize that certificate and avoid duplication of costs. Extending the verification to the next level really talks about this. So while we're talking about initially focusing on the primary supplier, how can we then get to tier 2, tier 3 suppliers and do that sequentially? Very, very important. And I think the last point on the slide talks about the work we're doing in this local content grading scheme, but we also shifted that to the work we do on the DTIC projects as well, where we have very strong kickoff meetings with either the applicant or the winning bidder. That's then classified as the tier 1 supplier. But we then get that supplier to coordinate all the verifications that need to be done on the tier 2, 3, or 4 levels of supply. And the main reason for that is we choose the samples, we choose the suppliers as the SABs. What they do is based on their relationships, they put these visits together. And again, to keep costs down, what they do is they group these. So you can do sometimes 2 or 3 visits in one day. If it's in one location, then we can actually combine those engagements as well. The last slide then just gives an indication. We launched this back in October 2021. As we stand right now in 2023, there's 19 certificates that have been issued to the local content grading scheme. A further 3 are in the reporting stage. 2, the verifications are taking place as we speak. And 4 customers have accepted the quotations, and they move now into the planning phase to move them into verifications. So I can say that the appetite in this space is very, very high. With all these challenges with the legislation, a lot of companies that are taking localization seriously are coming to us and wanting to go down this route of the voluntary certificates that they can have. And that brings you to my last slide. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naidu. That was quite clear and precise. Only 2 questions from the attendees. One from Togozisi, who's just asking about the time lags in terms of how long does it take when one is going through the verification process. And the second one is from an anonymous attendee who's asking, who pays for this verification? And I just heard the answer, but I just, for the benefit of the attendee. Yeah, if you can answer 100%. Those for starters, thank you.
Thank you. I'll certainly take those. So I think let's start with who pays for this. I think it's always a burning question. At this stage, this is very voluntary. So the scheme has been launched on a voluntary basis. Those 19 suppliers that I shared with you have all paid for this themselves. That's why this effort to try to make it cheaper is something that we're really working hand in glove with these suppliers. And we're posing all these different combinations of efforts to try and keep these costs down. So I think the first one, pretty much clear cut around the cost side of it. Sorry, if you can just help me with the other question.
The second one is the time lags. He was asking how long does it take? Yeah.
All right, great. So typically what we're doing at the moment is, with the appetite that I've shared with you around localization, the SABS has taken a decision to, I've now created a local content division within SABS. And I'm in the stages now of finally populating. So I'm bringing in full-time resources that will reside in this particular department. So there has been a slight time lag in the past where the process might have been delayed, but we're now looking at going forward from the end of May, we'll be in a position to start dealing with these. Literally, a lot of these projects will be able to start within the month that the applicant finalizes their quotation acceptance with us, and we'll be able to kick off their projects within a month of that. Unfortunately, the answer to the time it takes, it can be anything up to 3 months with a very simple verification, but these can go into 5 to 6 months, depending on how big these products are in terms of the input materials and largely the number of suppliers that go into it. We have a fixed set of procedures that we follow to make sure that our verifications are consistent. And so we take 90% of the cost of the verification of the input materials, and we make sure that we sample suppliers that are contributing to that 90%. So this is just guidelines that we have so that verifications and the results become more consistent. I hope that covers both those questions adequately. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a third one though. I don't know, as you are talking about setting up an office, is it possible for you to put out the contact details for that office on the chat? Because quite a number of attendees are saying, how do we contact Mr. Naidu? Just to, I think, to, require more services and things like that. So that at least it's one of the, immediate outcomes that they get in terms of how they contact that office, if you can put that up.
That's
there's
great.
Thank you, Mr. Naidu. And then I think for the DTIC, Catherine, there's one comment from Steve who's talking about we need to talk about National Treasury policy for competitive bids and the reduced 90/10 threshold to 50 million. And he's just saying we cannot beat the triple BEE importer. I don't know if you have a response to that, because it reads as the policy is already quite strict about this, and somehow he doesn't see it working. Are you able to respond, Catherine?
I can make a comment, Chair.
Yes.
It's not my area, that's National Treasury. Yes, we've heard of triple PFA all along not assisting industry per se. And triple PFA, the act itself, it's mainly about the point system, of which for the past 10 years, there have been talks that it's being overhauled. Hence now there is movement in terms of the public procurement bill. Our hope is on the new legislation or the act, if it gets enacted, because both industry, private sector have raised their concerns with regard to the current triple PFA as it is. It's just unfortunate. That's what we have on the table now, but we're hoping that Treasury will fast track the finalization of the bill so that we have a new legislation that's flexible, that will assist our companies. Yes, I do agree. The 90/10, 80/20, it's not helping anyone.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Catherine. I think it's one of those that we are now also even getting feedback from our attendees to say, then we can input into the policy development process. But whilst you are still on the platform, for Zia, Isaacs is saying, the list that you showed for the designated products, it's only about products, and what about services? So is there anything that we're doing around, designating services as well?
No, currently we can't designate services, unfortunately. But within the service, you may find that they are using goods that are designated. Therefore, the designation will apply. And the reason why we're not designating services, it's because of the WTO rules. It doesn't allow us to designate those services. But for example, in the space of construction, if it's a construction service, you may find that in that construction, they are required to use steel products. Therefore, the designation will apply to the steel products. They will be using maybe cement. The designation will apply to that portion of cement. So that's how the designation works in the space of services, but we can't purely designate a service per se.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that's clear to the person who asked. And I think in terms of now I'm directing this to attendees. Steve Jardine was asking about technical meetings. I hope that question has been answered by Mr. Naidu. If you just want, maybe to expand on it a bit, please can you just retype? But I think he talked about technical meetings that they're going to continue. And I think then another comment that is to the organizers of the webinar, if they can respond. Attendees are asking whether they're going to do the presentations. I don't know, from the organization desk, is somebody that can respond to that?
We will share the presentations.
Thank you so much, and please do share. Don't promise and not share, because colleagues are really interested. And Jules was asking around also, when Doc made an example of a tomato paste. And Doc, I want to say I agree with you as well, because one of the things I was recently, unpacking to my children as we were driving on the freeways of Johannesburg and seeing the containers that are stacked up there on M2, when you're driving M2 from the East Rand into Johannesburg. And then I was explaining to them why those containers are piling up, and now we are starting to be innovative around containers, is because really we're not taking things outside the country. And the issue of a tomato paste is very valid, because from the agricultural point of view and input products for that is very easy. But one of the things that one of the attendees has mentioned is about these big conglomerates or big markets, your Clicks, your Pick and Pays, in terms of absorbing that. I don't know, maybe Mr. Mashimbe or Doc, you can have a comment there. How do we assist that? How do we facilitate that? What is the bottleneck there? Because as much as we can produce these things, but if you don't have our local markets that are distributing for consumption, taking them up, then we have a problem. Any comment, Doc and Mr. Mashimbe?
Yeah, I think I've alluded to it. To me, that's one of the key next frontiers that we as a nation, and definitely I hope DTI and Proud DSA would champion. And that is, I've become more and more as I get older and hopefully a little bit wiser in terms of experience. I'm less in favor of legislation, and not that legislation is not important. I'm more in favor of complementing legislation with a lot of interaction with the key players. If we bring our wholesale and retail networks, and South Africa has got one of the globally competitive, interestingly enough, retail networks in many areas, definitely in terms of consumer goods. We need to bring them around the table and have a discussion around competitiveness, the very concept of competitiveness, that is not all about price. This is a conventional textbook definition of competitiveness. If we expand competitiveness to other aspects of competitiveness in terms of the social environment, in terms of poverty, in terms of unemployment, in terms of the positive side, job creation, income, and buying power creation, suddenly it's to the benefit of the network of retailers to have an economic environment in which more and more of whatever is possible is produced locally so that more income is generated, so that demand is higher. Now, this requires their active participation, not a commitment to say, I will buy 10% more or 5% more. I'm not interested in that percentage. Retailers must tell us there are 65% or 45% of my shelf space that is imported. Can we make this local? Put it out, and then put a timeline to it with the other players, including DTI and National Treasury, etc., and say, yep, the retailers are telling us 45% of their shelf space is imported items. Can we do it in the next 3 years, whatever it takes, without losing quality? And I emphasize that, without losing quality, to bring that 45% to 20%, and then 5 years later, bring it to 10%. And yes, we'll always need imports, but not to the extent that we do, and in that way to promote localization and reindustrialization of the economy.
Thank you so much, Doc. And I think what you are touching on, that's very important. It's lobbying, it's convincing, is collaboration, is cooperation. It's like, let's work together. Let's all have this as a common goal to achieve, and then let's achieve it. Legislation will help us in terms of regulating it, but I think more than anything, you need to win the people's hearts and really bring that competitiveness in. Mr. Mashembe?
Yeah, in fact, I want to throw in something that is important, is the fact that these retailers need us as customers. We are all employed in different sectors and industries that supply raw materials and components and whatever is utilized to produce those products. If we all lose our jobs because of imports, who's going to be able to afford their products? Whether it's FMCG products, it's furniture products, it's autos. I mean, it does not matter what retail sector you are in. You need customers to buy from you, and the more we lose our jobs, or the more of us are out of jobs, is going to spell disaster even for them, because then there'll be less people affording their products. And that is the thinking. There is a deliberate strategy, driven in government. The Department of Small Business Development is involved as well. We are also driving it, where there's an import replacement program around saying, and it's what the good doctor is saying. What is it that is on your shelves currently that can be replaced by, through a locally made product? And if you're not confident, roll out ESD programs. We've seen a lot of the retailers do that. You roll out an enterprise and supply development program where you deliberately capacitate these companies so they can produce up to your standards, and then you can ensure that the products that end up on your shelves are at the right quality, they have the right capacity, they can produce at the level that you want. Good success stories, especially in the clothing and textile retail space, that come from this as a result of the master plans. So it is working in other industries. We just need more retailers and more industries to come on board.
And thank you, Mr. Mashimbe, for making that example. I mean, your young designers emporiums are a testament to this, and also they are giving an opportunity and an enabling environment to the local guys to put their products and ideas on the shelves. And I think we did also get a compliment, which I think it's very important to note. When our attendees are really saying there's something else that we are doing right. This person was talking about now I'm not seeing this this comment, but it was talking about the fact that our some of the events that we do are very well organized around. I think it was around about export promotion. It's just that I'm not seeing the comment now, and I wanted to read because there was something else after that comment. I don't know if they've deleted it, but at least I was just happy to say we are seeing somebody who said this was done well, but I think they were just lamenting about now follow-ups and just making sure that those people are given an opportunity to produce fully, to get the markets that they were given exposure to. So that is what. So I think in terms of our session, we have come to the end of the session. I will just give each panelist to just give one line of closing remarks. And then I think some of the questions we'll try and respond to them directly on the question and answer session, but I think most of them we have dealt with one way or the other. And I implore the attendees to also test the DTIC where they've responded when they have specific questions so that they can be directed to the right office. With some of the questions that were placed around incentives for support, for development, for all of these, and the desk that organized the webinar can direct them to the right channels. I think, Catherine, I will start with you ladies first in terms of your closing remarks. Just one sentence, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. For me, it's we all of us, we have an obligation to develop and support local supply chains, especially when we do our procurement, be it at work, be it for your own use as an individual, where you are faced with a decision to choose between a locally produced product and an imported product. I will say go for a locally produced product. Let's all uplift the spirit of localization. Proudly South African, they like to say local is legal. So yeah, let's promote local. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Mr. Naidu?
I think from my side, I think we all have a role to play with the high unemployment rate that we face in our country. I'm sure we can all see the link to the efforts on localization. So from my side, we all have a role to play. Let's be active and let's make the difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Doc Abedian?
Thank you very much. I think I would suggest that localization is an imperative. We need to focus on it. It's good for the economy, it's good for job creation and poverty alleviation, but as importantly, it's good for environmental sustainability. Imports of what we could produce here means that unnecessarily depleting the sea and the air. And we all talk about caring for the environment and greenification, and yet when we go to the shop to buy something, we don't think about it. We got to be very, very active. It is not an idea, it's an action, and it requires a collective collaboration of what each one of us can do in order to make it happen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Mr. Mashimbe?
Thank you, Chair. We all know someone is unemployed. What are we doing to help them get into a job opportunity? The one thing that we all have at our disposal is the procurement spend, is the money that we're spending, is the buying power. We are all buying something daily. All you need to do is look at the label. If it says made in, let's pick a country. If it says made in China, you have created jobs in China. That's why they have 1.4 billion people, but with an unemployment rate that is between 3 to 4% annually, because we are all buying from them. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you. I think that's a very nice nugget to end with, that as South Africans, let's start there. But as manufacturers and small-scale producers as well, let's target to produce products that are competitive in the global economy. I mean, with the Africa Free Continental Trade now, we are given routes and ways to just broaden our market as South Africans. That's one. But also, the government is putting enabling institutions to make sure that, like SABS, your standards, your product is standardized and it can cross with all the international agreements that we have. It makes it easier for us to move goods and make sure that Africa and the globe becomes our market. I think with that said, I don't want to say anything more because I will ruin it. Our speakers were very eloquent in terms of, unpacking this for us. If any of our participants, I'd like to thank them as well. For also being very interactive. It's also nice to have seen that we have so many comments and so many attendees that are interested in this topic. Please continue to engage with us, because as public sector, we are here to serve our constituencies, and we want to make sure that whatever it is that we do is in line and we're catching you at the right moment, so we don't go parallel lines. Thank you for attending, and thank you to all our speakers, and I think I will render this session closed. Thank you so much.